Morning all. All right, so starting things off with a little bit of a different video today, talking about the 2001-2002 Detroit Red Wings. Now, I have done a video on this team before when I was doing videos on all the Stanley Cup winners, but I felt like this is a good time to revisit it, as during this offseason we've seen the Washington Capitals and the Pittsburgh Penguins try to make moves to get themselves back into potentially a playoff position after missing the 2022 playoffs. And prevailing opinion seems to be, hey, they're too old. They're too old, it's not going to happen. Now, the 2001-2002 Detroit Red Wings heard this as well. Now, 97 and 98, both of those years, Detroit wins the Stanley Cup. And it was an absolutely fantastic run in 97, and then they repeat it in 98. In 99, they lost in the second round against Colorado. And, of course, Colorado series were always great, too. 2000, they lose in the second round against Colorado again. So we start hearing the conversation about how Detroit needs to make changes. Things need to be different. The things just aren't working right for the Wings. And then 2001, those calls got a lot louder when the team lost in the first round against the LA Kings. Now, they never fell out of the playoffs. This was never a team that was going to fall out of the playoffs because their coach was Scotty Bowman, which is different from any team right now in the National Hockey League. Scotty Bowman, for my money, probably the best coach that the National Hockey League's ever had. Now, 97-98, when they won the Cup, they had a 44-23-15 record. 98-99, 43-32-7. 99-2000, we had four columns. The fourth column being the overtime losses. The third column still being ties. 48-22-10-2, 2000-2001. 49-29-4. And then the 01-02 season, they finished 51-17-10-6. So the record was always very good. And again, throughout all this, they're coached by Scotty Bowman, which does make a difference. But again, they lose in the first round in 2001, and there was a lot of talk about they're too old, they're too slow. They're too slow, it's been exposed. They get exposed in the playoffs every year now, and they need to get younger. They didn't. They really didn't. So the players from that 01-02 team in the above 30 category, Shanahan was 33, Fedorov 32, Hall was 37, Lidstrom 31, Robitaille 35, Yzerman 36, Larionov was 41, Chelios 40, Draper 30, Duchesne 36, Olesen 35, Gilchrist 34, Hasek 37, Krupp 36, and Slager 30. Now, some of these players didn't have a huge impact, obviously, on the Stanley Cup win, but many of them did. And these are the same players that the discussion was about how broken down and old they were in seasons previous. Now, they started the season 8-2. So for any team in the National Hockey League, that fast start is really, really important. And they kept up that momentum. 25 games into the season, they were 23-1-1. So ridiculously solid record after 25 games. They were winless in the final 7 games going into the playoffs. And this is where it gets interesting because they were winless in those final 7 games. And there was discussions about, if they peaked too soon. Maybe they peaked too soon. This is where the age is kicking in. They're getting old. And then in the first round, they meet up with the upstart Vancouver Canucks. And they trailed that series 2-0. In fact, they lost both of the first 2 games at home. So they're going to Vancouver down 2-0. I, as a Vancouver fan, very jubilantly excited. And in Game 3, it was 1-1. And it looked like maybe if Vancouver could win that Game 3, they could make that narrative, yep, the Wings are too old. Even the Canucks beat them. However, Lidstrom scores, and the rest is history. They won 4 in a row. That momentum swing from that Lidstrom goal carries the Red Wings past Vancouver. And then in the next round, they win their first 2, so that was 6 in a row that had been won in the playoffs. They lost Game 3, and then they won Game 4 and Game 5. And then they faced Colorado, so their nemesis from 1999 and 2000. And in 2002, they were behind in that series 3-2. So it looked like, again, the Wings were going to come up short, this time in the conference final. But coming up short is still coming up short, right? Hasek, the old goaltender, comes through. 24 saves in Game 6 in a 2-0 win. And then Game 7, that one was over early. 7-0 was the final score in Game 7 for the Detroit Red Wings. And Hasek only needed to make 19 saves. So back-to-back shutouts for Dominik Hasek. And an absolutely fantastic comeback victory in that series by Detroit. So that is 2 series out of 3 where Detroit starts not looking great and then they end up coming through, right? It is having those players that can have the big moments. It is having the veterans that know how to win. That is very important come playoff time. And then they lost game 1 of the Stanley Cup final against the Carolina Hurricanes. Artur Surbe, of course, fantastic run for Urbe that year. And then after that 3-2 overtime loss in game 1, they won the next 4. Again, once Detroit got going in that series, it was done. And again, for me personally, I was rooting for the Canes just as I rooted for the Canucks. I rooted for St. Louis. I don't remember with Colorado and Detroit. I think I just grabbed popcorn and just enjoyed the show. But again, I thought this has got to be it, right? So I was of the mind that this team was too old. I was of the mind that, the Red Wings, they've lost in the playoffs 3 years in a row. They haven't been in the Final Four for those 3 years. It's probably done. The window's probably closed. This is why I don't get into that argument with teams. This is why I'm non-committal, because I've seen before people talking about the window being closed, and it's not. So Detroit absolutely proved people wrong in 2002. Yzerman was an absolute warrior in those playoffs. 23 games, 6 goals, 17 assists, 23 points. You could tell in the Vancouver series he wasn't right. You could tell he wasn't 100%. And he still played every game. He had knee realignment surgery. He was in tons of pain during that run, and he missed, I think it was 46 games to start the next season. And never really quite the same after that injury. But Yzerman wasn't going to allow the fact that his knee was out of alignment to keep him out of the lineup. It just wasn't a thing. It was playoff time. And that's where the discussion comes in, too, about players playing through injury. Again, Yzerman's 36. He'd kind of earned the right to do so if he wanted to. He'd been in the league about 20 years. If he says, I can go, you let him go. And I'm sure that was Bowman's attitude, too. Hey, Stevie said he can play. He's going to play. Now, Shanahan, 23 games, 8 goals, 11 assists, 19 points. He actually went on, I think, till 2009, his career. Brett Hull, 23 games, 10 goals, 8 assists, 18 points. Interestingly enough, 37 years of age. He wins his first Stanley Cup in his mid-30s with the Dallas Stars. Up until then, the argument was Brett Hull was not a playoff performer. He wasn't good enough. He didn't have the heart for playoff hockey. Again, right into his 30s. And then, after this Stanley Cup win, and there were some key goals by Hull during that run, suddenly there were articles up there of, hey, so we used to talk about how you couldn't win with Brett Hull. Maybe we got that backwards. Now, you can't win without him. And really, I thought it was a nice redemption story for Brett Hull. First with Dallas and then with Detroit. He wins Stanley Cups in both locations. Chelios, 40 years of age, 23 games in the playoffs, 1 goal, 13 assists, and a plus 15. And I know people don't like plus minus, but that plus 15 is very impressive for a 40-year-old defenseman who would just keep playing. He kept playing until basically he ran out of opportunities. Chelios, I think he'd still be playing now if somebody kept giving him contracts. He'd be like, sure, I'll play. Duchesne, 23 games, 5 assists. He would retire after that. Steve Duchesne, player I have a jersey of because he was one of my favorite players back in the day. And he had a solid run, too, in a more support role for the Detroit Red Wings that year. And Hasek, 16-7 with a .920 save percentage. Back-to-back shutouts here. And he retired after that 2002 Cup win. Kind of felt like, well, I've done everything I can do. But the desire to play was just too strong. So a year later, he came back. And, it was interesting with Detroit at the time because a lot of people said, this team's too old, they can't win. And this is why I bring this team up whenever I hear the argument of too old, can't win. How many of these players are in their mid-30s and 40s? And before somebody says, well, back then, that wasn't common back then either. That was really uncommon, and it felt like Detroit would hear, all these comments about how they were too old, and they'd just double down by getting older. So this was an interesting strategy that ended up working out pretty well for Detroit. It wasn't technically a dynasty, but it sure felt like it during that period in time. 3 Stanley Cup wins in 6 years, not too shabby. And again, those old players with the old legs, those legs get kind of young come playoff time. It is a matter of getting that really good regular season and just having that confidence, having that team depth. Obviously, there were other young players as well for that Detroit team. Datsuk comes to mind. He was 23 at the time, but again, the old veterans were the ones that helped carry them to that Stanley Cup. Datsuk would do it later in 2008. But yeah, so I wanted to talk about that today. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below, as always. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happened upon this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, and now you know why I'm not going to say a team's too old to win. All right, thanks again for all your support. I'll talk to you guys again soon.